I should probably grab a different stool. This is not.
It
would look aesthetically pleasing though on the video.
It's the slow.
Yeah.
And Timothy said it. We're in 1 Timothy chapter 3. We've been working our way through 1 Timothy, and then we'll go into 2 Timothy, and so on until we feel like stopping for summer, or I take a holiday, or some such thing. Eh? Okay. 1 Timothy 3. Anybody want to start by reading?
I can't find it. Do you know what pages it was?
1576.
106.
Oh.
2034.
Wait, what is it? We're in church now.
Anybody want to read it?
I can only read the first half. Just kidding.
Sorry,
So-
1 Timothy 2.
Chapter 3.
3. Okay.
Philemon's willing to read half, though he read 2 weeks ago. I was kind of aiming to have another voice read each week. I thought that'd be kind of cool.
Nobody else read.
I can also read. Oh,
Holy!
Okay, well, I was going to say right there.
No, go for it, Holly. You got it, apparently. I saw your hand. So,
Here is a trustworthy saying: whoever aspires to be an overseer desires a noble task. Now the overseer is to be above reproach, faithful to his wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not given to drunkenness, not violent but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own family well and see that his children obey him, and he must do so in a manner worthy of respect. If anyone does not know how to manage his own family, how can he take care of God's church? He must not be a recent convert, or he may become conceited and fall under the same judgment as the devil. He may also have a good reputation with outsiders, so that he will not fall into disgrace and into the devil's trap. In the same way, deacons are to be worthy of respect, sincere, not indulging in wine, and not pursuing dishonest gain. They must keep hold of the deep truths of the faith with a clear conscience. They must first be tested, and then, if there is nothing against them, let them serve as deacons. In the same way, the women are to be worthy of respect, not malice talkers, but temperate and trustworthy in everything. A deacon must be faithful to his wife and must manage his children and household well. Those who have served well gain an excellent standing and great assurance in their faith in Christ Jesus. Although I hope to come to you soon, I am writing you these instructions so that, if I am delayed, you will know how people ought to conduct themselves in God's household, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and foundation of the truth. Beyond all question, the mystery from which true godliness springs is great. He appeared in the flesh, was vindicated by the Spirit, was seen by angels, was preached among the nations, was believed on in the world, was taken up in glory.
awesome. Thank you. Okay, so initial observations, questions. What are you guys seeing?
I thought it was interesting how it made sure to very clearly and distinctly mention alcohol in both of those.
Mm-hmm. But it doesn't say anything about drugs.
Hey!
But you're right, yeah, it does specifically mark alcohol and drunkenness as an issue. Sorry. Shh. Yeah?
Appreciated the part where it was like, if he can't even run his own household, how can he run the church?
Yeah. Yeah, this is an interesting concept in that in most other letters that Paul writes, he refers to the church as the body of Christ. But here in 1 Timothy, he refers to the church more as the household of God and the house of the Lord. So it's the same concept. The body of Christ and the house of God in Paul's writing are the same concept, but here he kind of uses it a little differently. A household has more structure. It has more, it has different roles than a body might have in the sense of its definitions. And I agree with you. I love that statement. If he cannot handle his household, how will he manage the church? Right? And that is quite significant. That's a really good observation. Yeah, nice one. Good catch.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I was trying to be encouraging. They say to reward and encourage the behavior that you want to see more of from people.
Big brain right there.
Understand.
You know, Pavlov's dog and all that. So, positive reinforcement. That's what that's called.
Okay.
Okay, I'm just gonna move
Breeze
on from
over
there.
that.
Any other observations or
Yeah.
questions or thoughts? Okay, well, let's get into the text then. I've broken this into sort of 3 sections, though there is kind of 4. The fourth one at the end would be that hymn fragment. It's like it seems like not a full hymn, but maybe a verse or a section of a hymn that was well known in the early church, from verse 16 to the end, which is just verse 16. But yeah, the first 2 sections I have marked down there are the qualifications or the expectations of an overseer and the expectations of a deacon. In some of your Bibles, in my Bible, it actually puts those in one section, one big header section. Qualifications for overseers and deacons. So I put the lists up here. So totally makes sense, right? That pretty much covers it. So first of all, at the very beginning, overseers are told, 1, it's a noble task to pursue to be an overseer of the church. Now, an overseer, we use the term elder in our churches today. Paul also uses the term elder. He uses it in Titus, and he seems to have the same concept of for overseer as he does for elder. And so, an elder of the church or an overseer of the church is one who is a leader in the church. His main role or job, although that's not distinctly outlined in this list is a list of characteristics. The character of an overseer, character of a leader should look like this. But the role of the elder or overseer is largely the teaching, preaching, and prayer of the church. So what we in our church, we define our eldership as being the spiritual leaders or under shepherds of the church. So their role is to teach, to preach, and to pray. That's the primary focus of our eldership in our church. So the overseers list is quite long, and the first part of it, though, is to be above reproach. What does that mean? To be above reproach. Maybe one of your versions has a different wording there, but what does that mean? What do you think, Nathan?
I guess in other terms, there's no dirt on you. Like, there isn't anything that people can call out, or you're living your life in a way that doesn't have any drawbacks or any criticisms to it.
Okay, yeah.
At least significant ones, but.
Sure. Yeah, you seem to be living in such a way that people can't clearly call you out for sin in your sinful lifestyle, perhaps. Yeah, you don't live in a way that is easy to be approached and accused, maybe is a good word. Yeah. Yeah. So I like the word clean there. You're living a clean life. Yeah. Anyone else? What do you think? Above reproach. Are we okay with that definition? Okay. So that's actually the main command or character of the overseer. Their primary characteristic is to be above reproach. The rest of the things on the list are kind of the details of what it looks like to be a person who's above reproach. So it's rather than it being above reproach plus all these other things, it's actually more kind of, we should read this list as being above reproach is to be all of these things. Okay. Now, just kind of a neat note that I pulled out of some commentaries is that this list is very similar to a kind of a standard Greco-Roman list of what good character looked like. So this would be the expectations of a general would look like this. A general of a Roman army or Roman legion or whatever would have a similar list of expectations for his character. Similar, though not fully identical. And so these lists are not uncommon, and in many ways what's pulled into this list is to some degree cultural, in that it's what their culture deemed as above reproach. I don't think our list today would be too different, but we might have some things we would add. For example, as I kind of jokingly mentioned a moment ago, we have a clear comment about alcohol, but there's no clear comment about, say, drugs. And so in our culture today, we might add something like, instead of saying not a drunkard or someone who's not given to alcohol, but maybe someone who is not under the influence of mind-altering substances, right? And so we might word that same expectation and character differently than we do, than they did, but still have the same intent. So it's a dynamic equivalency in that our culture has changed enough that it doesn't make the list irrelevant, but it means we need to understand that the list is about what it looks like to be of good character. And some of that is going to be found in our culture. What does it look like in culture to be of good character? As well as what does it look like to be of good character in the eyes of God? This list does both well, and any list that we were to have today should also do the same. Okay? So the reason why I bring up that cultural note is that we have to be so cautious of legalism. See, we really, really like lists. We love lists and we love rules in churches. It gives us structure and walls and an easy way to say this is right and that's wrong and call it black and white. But what we're talking about here is the character of a person. And if we find ourselves being too legalistic, we'll find ourselves without any people who can appropriately fill the role because no person will be perfect. And the goal here is to seek a character, a heart, an orientation of a person where they're headed in their life towards Christ, pursuing the noble task of leadership. And so we want to be able to hold this list not loosely in the sense that we allow those who are drunkards or bullies to be leaders, but loosely in the sense that we want to recognize its intent over its legalism. Does that make sense? Okay, everyone clear on that? Any questions about that? Any thoughts on that? Okay, so this list is pretty good. First of all, if you want to be an overseer, you need to be a monogamous person. Now, this is where, right off the bat, right at the beginning, this is where we have the balancing act of legalism and intent. The intent is character. It should be someone who is able to commit to one spouse, to being committed to their family, to be committed to their relationship. However, some churches today have taken this to a legalistic place, that an overseer, an elder, has to be a married man who's only ever been married once and is still married for that one time to that one spouse, because he has to be a husband of one wife. Therefore, it must be a man who is currently married to his first and only wife. So is that legalistic? Well, what does that say then about any singled man? Whether he's single because he has not yet married, single because he's married and his wife has left him, whether he remained of faith or not. What about single and his wife has died and he's been left widowed? Why would we take this one requirement and eliminate possibly and potentially very faithful people from leadership simply because they're not currently married or currently married to their first wife? Now, this does not excuse someone who practices infidelity or has an affair, remarries, becomes faithful, and all of a sudden it's okay for them to be a leader in the church. There's a lot more to do there. But we're looking for the character of the man who is committed to his family and his spouse. Right? That's the character of the man we're looking for, or the person in leadership we're looking for, is someone who is committed to their family and to their spouse. If their spouse dies, Paul actually encourages widows to remarry. Why would he encourage that while also discouraging them from being in leadership? That doesn't make sense. In 1 Corinthians 7, Paul encourages people, men and women, to not marry, instead to focus their whole life and energy on serving God, if they can. 1 Corinthians 7. And if they can't, then to marry and to still serve God. So why would he encourage people to not marry in one place, and yet in another say, well, you can't even be a leader of a church unless you are married? It seems to be counterproductive and at odds with his own teaching. And so we have to remember then the context of 1 Timothy. Paul is dealing with a church that is dealing with false teaching and false teachers who seem to have been leading this church. So Paul is redefining for this church in Ephesus what leadership looks like and the character of a leader. And the first part is the character of a leader is one who is committed to his family, to his spouse, and later on down the list is not only committed to his family, but is able to actually lead and manage his family and household well. Because if he's a leader of the church, he must also be a leader at home. Which was Janelle's point. Good catch. Okay, let's keep going on the list. Self-controlled, sensible, respectable, hospitable, able to teach. What do you guys think of those expectations of an overseer or elder? About what you would expect? Okay. Self-controlled, sensible, respectable, hospitable, able to teach. Then we have a few disqualifiers, I would call them. So first we have the positives. These are like what qualifiers. This is like the stuff that's good. The next is like the disqualifiers. Not a drunkard, not a bully, not quarrelsome, and not greedy. What do you guys think of those?
Seems pretty reasonable.
So far on this list, do you feel like we have a lot of leaders who can meet those expectations?
Yes, but maybe not always.
Right.
Yeah.
I certainly find myself quarrelsome at times. And yet I would... Is that a "you're correct, Andrew" face? Is that what that was?
Don't worry about it.
Yes, indeed. You are correct. Right, I think there's times where any of these can be difficult for any person. Certainly some of them are easier to deal with than others, right? You're not given to drunkenness if you don't have alcohol in your house. Okay, so those are pretty reasonable expectations of rules that would be a person of good character would live up to these, right? They still fit to our culture today. These are pretty timeless. I think that's a good thing. We've already talked about managing the household well. Now there's two more at the end. Not a new convert and someone with a good reputation. Now he explains that a bit, but I would love to know, what are your guys' thoughts? Why do you think those are important qualifications or important details to add into the list for the character of a leader? Not a new convert.
If you're a new convert, then you may not be able to teach properly.
Absolutely. A new convert may struggle to teach properly. More prone to false teaching. Because they just don't understand yet. They're still learning. They're still in the early stage of their belief. Yeah, absolutely.
They don't have the wisdom that someone who might be older in their faith would have.
Absolutely. We gain wisdom not only as a gift from God, but also through life experience. And if we haven't had the experience yet, we haven't gained that wisdom. A lot of wisdom comes from trusting God, and a lot of our trust is built when things are difficult and He's still there, right? And we find ourselves relying on God. Well, that also builds our wisdom. In Luke, it says that Jesus grew in wisdom and maturity. So even Jesus had to develop wisdom to some degree while He was on earth before He became the teacher or the leader of the church, of his movement, I guess, before He gathered His disciples and began His ministry. So yeah, there's something about needing time to build wisdom.
The reason it says in here is to not be conceited.
Yeah. To not be conceited. Well, how would that happen for a new convert? Peach stage Calvinists, yes!
Well, don't you have the story of like you came back from Bible college and you thought you knew everything? And you had like 1 year of Bible college?
Yeah, why are you making this so personal?
Well, it was the story that popped in my head.
You're the one who makes it personal.
Yeah, you took it personally.
Fair enough. You're absolutely right, though. I've kind of termed that academic arrogance. So when you start learning about the Bible, about ministry, and you go off to Bible school and you just kind of get bombarded with a lot of new knowledge, or a lot of knowledge and you get really excited about it. You're very immersed in it. And then you come back to your old community and you find yourself having advanced in your understanding, but interestingly, sometimes the character lags, the maturity lags behind the understanding. Yeah, there's a little latency delay. But
At least
A little
400.
bit of a lag.
at least 400 ping. Yes. So, yeah, absolutely. So you gain this new knowledge, and all of a sudden you find yourself more, I don't know, conceited is a good word. Yeah, and the character isn't there yet, the character of the leader. There might be another way. How else might a new convert be conceited if they were to be made a leader or an elder?
I don't know if this is like exactly what you just said, but I know that for some people, you have all this like excitement from being like a new believer of Christ, and it's like, yeah, and then it goes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so you're talking about sort of the initial high of the conversion and then the crash that follows afterwards when discipleship is lacking.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a good chat with someone about that the other day.
It was me.
No, I had a chat with an elder last night for about 3 hours. But you and I have talked about this, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yours wasn't immediate. I think it was maybe a slower descent, but yeah, it's.
It was staying.
But yeah, like what we talked about was that whole ongoing cycle of faith, of the high moments in your faith, and those moments where you feel a little more distant from God. But ideally, as those ups and downs happen, you're constantly growing in deeper faith and relationship to God, theoretically. What I'm talking about, so I agree, that is a possibility. What I talked about with that elder was if we hyper-emphasize conversion as our goal as a church, and we do not have discipleship, then we make converts who are excited by their conversion and then feel abandoned immediately afterwards and crash hard if there's no follow-through, no discipleship, and no continued relationship or connection. How else might conceit here happen? Yeah.
Like if they're just new to it and then suddenly find themselves in a leader position, then they might be feeling superior to be like, wow, if I just got here and I'm already like above you all, you must be pretty bad.
Exactly. I think that is definitely part of what Paul is saying. You bring in a new convert, and if you put them in leadership right away as a new convert, there's this sense of of superiority, authority, power, and it's unbalanced because in so many ways they have not yet matured in their understanding of faith. What do you guys think about the being of good reputation part?
If you put this leader in a position of leadership where his name is going to be spread around the town, and he already has a bad reputation in the town, then people aren't going to want to come listen to him preach because they're like, well, he doesn't do good in this area in life. Why should I think that he's going to do well in preaching about the gospel? So then you can't reach other people because your leader is already in the toilet with the other groups.
In the toilet. Yes. Yeah. It's hypocritical. If they have a bad reputation but are leaders of the church, it could look hypocritical. Yeah. Other thoughts?
You just want someone who's respectable. You're not really respectable if you don't have a good reputation. That word.
And respectable is on the list, isn't it, right?
Yeah.
And it's all part of being above reproach. If you have a bad reputation, then you're not above reproach. You can be approached, right? You can be reprimanded for your poor character.
Our greatest testimony is how we live our lives. Then, if we've already said a bad testimony, are we called to leadership?
My Bible says that will be a good role model to the church.
Yeah. Yeah. A leader. Sorry. Okay, I was just going to say, yeah. So a leader is exactly what Soames is saying. Actually, all of you said this quite well. A leader of the church needed to be someone of good reputation. Because not only were they representing what it was to be a mature Christian to their church, but they were also missional to their community. And Paul takes very seriously the missional job of the church, which is to bring the gospel into the lives of other people in the community. And if you have a bad reputation, your testimony or witness to the church will be equal with your reputation. in many cases.
So, I almost wonder though, because with a lot of like people, obviously you wouldn't put like a new convert right into leadership or anything like that.
Yeah.
But if you did have someone who had a bad reputation, think of like the woman at the well or something, and she was like converted and she was immediately like going around and sharing the word and stuff. So then, if somebody has had a bad reputation or has come from a bad place but turned to God, like, where does that still fit into leadership, or you just like if you mess up in the past?
So each case is unique in that situation, I think. And this is where we need to avoid legalism and pursue the intent here. The intent is good character, right? To be above reproach. I think that if someone has cultivated a bad reputation, converts, begins to transform, you don't bring them into leadership until they have repaired their reputation so that it is no longer bad, and then it is good. There are examples of that in our community. I think I can safely mention Aubrey. Aubrey was not well liked by many in the community. He was known as a shrewd and cruel businessman prior to becoming a Christian. When he became a Christian, the way in which he changed and the way he treated other people in the community, in business, was phenomenal. So those of you who don't know Aubrey, he's Marion's husband, but he's passed a couple years ago. So you may not have ever met him, which is okay. But he was a phenomenal man. When I first moved here, he wasn't yet ill, and he was still fully himself. And just phenomenal man who had such a deep faith and incredible passion and love for people. He was one of the first people in this church to accept me before they'd hired me. He was so sure that I was the right person for this place. And I think his opinion was a significant factor in me coming here. Not my decision to come here, but in the church's decision to hire me. I think his opinion of me mattered to people, which is great. I'm really grateful for Aubrey. And he was just such an encouragement. He constantly, every week, he would pull me aside and pray for me and encourage me, and just a phenomenal man. But his reputation prior to becoming a Christian was not good. And it wasn't until after his conversion that he began to change, and even then it took many years before his reputation was changed in such a way that people in the community viewed him differently. And there were still some in the community who still looked poorly upon him from years of past hurt. Yet he had changed drastically. And I think he was absolutely qualified to be an elder as far as I knew him, though I did not know him for longer than, I think, 2 years before he passed. But as far as I knew him, I would have considered him qualified as an elder, having restored his reputation largely within the community and done all that he could to make right any of his wrongs in the past.
Is it more of a prepare your reputation as so far as you can?
Yeah, there's a certain degree where you can't make other people be okay with you, and yet your reputation should be without reproach. So someone might be able to say, well, 10 years ago you did this, but no one would be able to say within the past 5 years since my conversion, or 15 years since my conversion, or whatever, that I've done anything wrong, or that I've treated you in such a way. Zacchaeus would be a really good example as well from the Bible, right? Zacchaeus, tax collector. Jesus has lunch with him. Something transforms Zacchaeus drastically. Zacchaeus then gives money back to everybody and begins the work of making amends and restoring his reputation. Though it does not happen overnight. He was a tax collector, and people would still not have viewed him nicely or kindly at first. Okay, so good reputation seems to make sense. So these are the qualifications for our overseers or elders. And these are the qualifications we look to when we're picking elders for our church. We're supposed to look to. And so we look to these as a definition of the character. So we try to look beyond the legalism of this to the character of the person. One who is above reproach and who is able to teach and manage their house and therefore the church well. Now there's also deacons. Deacons. Do you guys know what deacons are? What are deacons? Somebody tell me if you know.
It's that thing in Minecraft.
Those are beacons.
Those are beacons.
I saw the beacon at Sacred Heart Church the other day.
What?
But did you see Nana's grass?
Pretty sure
That was
deacon
today.
I
means
saw
one who
Nana's grass
serves.
today.
Yes. Deacon means one who serves. Initially, deacon in biblical times, deacon might have been a similar word to what you would use for like waiter or waitress. One who serves, one who waits tables, right? So a deacon was someone who served in the practical sense of service. One who would wait tables, care for people's needs. In Acts chapter something that I just forgot off the top of my head, 3, 4? 4? I think it might be 4.
Nice.
It's just before the stoning of Stephen, which I think is chapter 6 or 7. Anyways, the apostles determine that the church is getting too difficult for just the 12 of them to handle. Keep in mind that in Acts chapter 2, more than 3,000 people are added to the church's numbers. So we got 12 apostles now leading a church of 3,000 people. 12 is enough staff to handle a church of 3,000, I think. I haven't actually worked in a church of 3,000. But we had 8 staff in a church of 500, so I figured 12 could probably handle a church of 3,000. That makes sense.
That's math.
But the apostles found themselves so busy with the work of teaching and prayer that they didn't have time to meet the needs of every widow or orphan or child or family in the church. And so they decided that what they needed was a team of people whose only task or primary task was the service of those in need, was to care for the needs of the people, to serve people, specifically the widows and the orphans. That was their primary mandate. And so those people were chosen, 7 of them were chosen, and they were called the deacons. Those who serve.
Straight at the start, chapter 6.
Chapter 6. Right. And then stoning of Stephen's right after that, right? 6 and 7? Yeah. So, perfect. Thanks for looking that up, Kai. So here we've got now qualifications for deacons. So the early church in Acts, sort of in Acts 2 through to 6 or 7, we see them kind of figuring out their structure, what it was to look like a church. And here, Paul seems to carry the same structure of that early church setup in Jerusalem and apply it to Ephesus. You can have overseers and you can have deacons, but they need to be qualified for those roles. The overseers should fall into these qualifications. The deacons should have qualifications. Now, the deacons are quite unique. First of all, they have the qualification, a husband of one wife. So once again, same qualifications, same character reference. One who is committed to their family. Interestingly, unlike in the overseers, the wives of deacons have a specific set of rules themselves. They're singled out. Why do you think that is?
Maybe because they would have helped the deacons do their work.
Sure. Yeah, it's very possible, I would guess even likely, that a married couple who stepped into deaconship would serve together. That yes, while the one of them might be called the deacon, the wives of the deacon were to serve as well. It was a thing you did together as a family, as a unit. That's definitely, I think, part of the reason. There may be one other reason, and that reason is that we have women deacons talked about very openly in the Bible. Paul himself names some women as deacons in Romans chapter 16. So we know that there were women who served as deacons. Okay? So even though the qualification is a husband of one wife, we know there was women who were deacons. And so once again, we have to remember this is a qualification of character committed to their marriage. In that way, we can look at things like 1 Corinthians 7 and say, if they have chosen not to marry another human being, but have instead dedicated their life to God, as if married to their ministry or to God, then they are still committed and devoted to that relationship with God. Okay? Anyways, it's a thing of character. Now, wives have a certain list. Their list is to be respectable, faithful, self-controlled, and not gossips or slanderers or malicious talkers. They're not to be gossips. That's the easy terminology. Do I need to expound on why?
Nope.
Gossip is a very dangerous and destructive thing in any relationship, in any community. And in an early church, and in this time period, men worked, and men went to war, and men were busy with the tasks of the day. And so there was this kind of assumption that they weren't generally busy with idle talk. Although, in fairness, Paul does call out false teachers for being those who participate in idle talk and gossip. And in 3 John, we see that he speaks against a guy named Diotrephes, who is a slanderer and a gossip. Okay, so this isn't limited to women, but Paul gives it specifically to women. And part of that might be, especially not just to women, but to the wives. Because the wives would work together in raising their children, doing the chores of the day in the household in their groups. And the risk, of course, is the gossip that can be happening behind the scenes, beneath the eyes of the leaders that aren't paying attention. This is not just a woman's problem. To be clear, gossip is not a women's problem, but it is very common amongst groups of women. Okay, moving on. No one seems to have a problem with that. Trying to be fair in the way that I proclaim that. No, a deacon should be worthy of respect and not hypocritical and not a drunkard and not greedy. Someone who loves money. We're going to see this again in chapter 6 of 1 Timothy. I suspect that one of the significant aspects of the false teaching happening in Ephesus was a teaching around money or false teachers seeking wealth for themselves. See, the early church was really susceptible to corruption around wealth because the early church didn't have clear instructions on money as much as they had in the Jewish culture. See, in the Jewish culture, they had the temple tax, the tithe. It was literally 10% of a person's income or wealth was given to the temple to cover the needs and the costs of the temple and the priests that served there, the Levites. But in the New Testament church, they were not any longer meeting in the temple, and they no longer practiced a 10% temple tax, a tithe. That was no longer demanded of the believers. But in Acts 2, we see that the believers sold much of what they had. They brought their wealth, whatever wealth it was, to the church and shared with people as they had need. And of course, that comes with great risk. A wolf in sheep's clothing coming amongst those who are willing to be generous with what they have. Take advantage of that generosity for their own gain and their own success. They might teach falsely about giving, that if you give me more money, God will give you more blessing. That kind of teaching exists today, and it's evil and vile. And so a deacon and an overseer both must not be greedy and lovers of money. Because what will wealth do us in the end, right? As Paul makes the argument later in chapter 6, naked you came into the world, and naked you'll go out of it. So what good is any money? Rather, we find contentment in meeting the needs of the day, not in excess or pursuing wealth for oneself. So we must not be greedy. And those who pursue leadership and those who are leaders must not be greedy. However, both deacons and elders both must manage their households well. Managing a household is not only in the way you parent and handle your wife and your spouse and your children, but managing your household also includes the finances of your house. So while you must not be greedy, you still have to be able to manage well. The church is not a place for poor money management, especially if the church is practicing a New Testament style of church in which generosity plays higher than expectation on tithing. Then we must manage that well. So if we do not manage people's generosity well, we do them a disservice and provide poor leadership. Okay, so those are the definitions of these things. Why does this stuff matter to you? These structures. Why do these lists of character matter to you guys? Why did I think this was teaching you about? What do you think, Andrew?
So that if we're looking to be leaders in the church, we know we have a guideline on things that we should be able to follow so that we can be true and proper leaders in the church.
Sure. As you guys grow into the church and look towards being leaders, you understand and hopefully have a goal of character to work towards. You can look at what the character of a leader in the church might be and begin to look at your own life and go, what areas do I need to continue to work on, to mature in, to grow in wisdom? In what ways do I need to become more awake and adult in my life that I might be a man of good or a woman of good character in order to serve in the church? Yeah, what do you think?
I think also just being a leader in general, not just in the church, but just like in general, especially if we want to spread the gospel and like show people who God is, acting like that and showing that that's what we need to be.
Absolutely. Every one of us, to some degree, leads others. To some degree. Other people see the way we live and the way we act, and to some degree, they learn from us or follow after us if we are worthy of their following. As you guys age, you'll see it in younger people will start looking up to you. If I involve you in things like junior youth leadership or senior youth leadership or anything like that, you'll start to see that those younger kids will look up to you. They want to follow you. And you may not be a deacon or an overseer. You may not be a deacon or an elder, but you're absolutely right, Holly, that regardless of whether you have these titles, this is the character of the Christian, right? Who witnesses through their life and through their character to the world around them. Yeah.
It also helps us to be able to keep our leaders accountable. So if we're, say, like you're teaching us this stuff and we realize, like, wait a second, Andrew's life isn't aligning with this. We're able to kind of see that better and to be more aware of it. So then maybe we aren't as like, I don't know if we'd have the authority to call you on it, but we could at least talk to one of the other people if we see something.
No, because we're a Baptist church, we believe in the priesthood of all believers. So you, to a degree, do carry the authority to say, to call or at least question me. In fact, in Matthew 18, it says that if you do have a concern with another person in your church, you should approach them one-on-one first to ask them. And if they receive your concern, or at least, acknowledge it and work with you on it, you've restored a relationship. You've restored your brother or your sister to faith, or to wholeness with you. However, if they resist and say that they have done nothing wrong, or if they resist and say that they don't agree with you, or whatever, if they will not hear you, then you are to go to the leadership above them and hold them accountable by their leaders. So then you would go, if let's say you had an issue with me, you came to me and said, I never got an issue with you, and I was like, that's your problem, not mine. And you're like, no, that really isn't. Then you would then go to my leaders. And in this case, my leaders would be the lead pastor, the elders, and pretty much anybody other than me. I'm a youth pastor. I'm at the bottom of the totem pole. So pretty much everybody else.
I'm below you.
I guess technically David's below me, which is great. But David gets more grace because he's an intern. So, yeah, I don't know.
That's true. They expect less from me. Like a lot less.
We all expect
Actually, the
less.
standards are almost non-existent.
Good,
It's like,
Holly.
as
You
long
are
as you're willing to
being a
try to
savage.
improve,
The standards are not non-existent. Let's be very clear. Here's your standards, in case you were wondering.
Yeah, David.
Not David.
Yeah,
Don't be a
David.
bully.
Oh, it's right on the list.
David.
Okay.
Not really.
It doesn't help if we bully him now about being a bully. That
No,
just,
we're holding him accountable.
oh, it's different, right?
I don't
Okay.
know, we gotta
And if
talk
he
about
knows
the
what it's like-
alcoholism.
The alcoholism's the one we got to talk about.
how did you guys find out?
Joke's on you. I don't drink alcohol. I do drugs. It's not on the list.
Drink
Do
up.
what you guys super want to do. I don't. That's what I thought.
Yeah. Anyways, you're absolutely right. It does allow us to hold our leadership accountable. Furthermore, remember that at the beginning of this study, a couple of weeks back, I talked about how each of you as young adults are in many ways welcomed in to be adults within the church. This Brightview Church is your church. This is your community. If you're 18 years of age and have been baptized, you can actually be a member of our church. If you're not 18, then you can't yet be a member. If you haven't been baptized, come talk to me. Okay? But you guys are of the age, or coming close to that age, where you begin to have an input into our church, which means that you do need to know these kind of things, not only for every reason that you guys just said, because you were dead on accurate with those reasons, but the one more reason I can think of is that in our church, when we gather to elect leadership, and we're putting new elders into place, or deacons into place, and there's a vote, this is your church too. Those elders and deacons are part of your decision as well. Your voice matters. Your vote counts. It's worth being able for you to say and look at those names who we put forward and say, we're going to put this person forward as a deacon, and for you all to be able to look and say, yeah, I see why you're putting him forward. That person matches this expectation, this character, this profile that's laid out by Paul. Or you can say, I don't understand. Do they not know about the problem with his reputation? Have they never seen that person's behavior with others when they bully them? And maybe we haven't seen that. So as a member, you come to us and you tell us. And then we're able to reevaluate. You make your name, or you make your voice heard at the meeting if it hasn't been heard prior. Right? This stuff is more than just holding account, more than just knowing your expectations for you as a Christian leader, but it's also about your participation in the body or in the household of the church. In your part in participating and helping us to find good leadership, that this church would be led well for your sake, for each of our sakes. And it does nobody any good when someone who is not qualified is put into leadership, and it definitely does not do the unqualified person any good. They find themselves in more pain, more difficulty, and under a lot more pressure when they find themselves in a position they're not qualified to take. Okay, any other thoughts or questions on overseers and deacons? Feel like you got a good grasp of the profile, of the character profile? Remember, it's not about the legalism of the list, right? It's not like it only has to be the things on this list and nothing else that makes a good character. Obviously, there's things today that we would need to include in that. This does not include anything about, say, pornography or infidelity, aside from the husband of one wife part. I guess that would kind of include that stuff. You know, the commitment to the family. I guess that would be included on there. It doesn't talk about drugs, as we've kind of mentioned. It doesn't talk about other noble tasks, like we've got self-controlled, sensible, respectable, hospitable, able to teach. We might have other positive characteristics that we would want on that list. Right? Someone who understands good doctrine, or knows the people of our community and has known them here, has gotten to know people in this community. So that might be a positive thing. Someone who's well known or knows others. It might be someone, we might add to the list something like, is bold enough to go door to door in a society that no longer allows such things or sees that as being a positive. Anyways, my point is the list is not exhaustive nor restrictive. The point of the list is to be a character profile of the Christian leader. What is the character? And the ultimate side of the character is there to be above reproach. Knowing this list is why I sometimes joke that I'm not a good pastor. By the way.
That's good.
Yeah. Because there's many times where I don't feel like I'm very self-controlled. Lots of times where I struggle to teach. I'm definitely quarrelsome at times. I have lots of problems. Sensible. Sometimes I can be a little unreasonable.
Unsensible one.
Yes, that would be unreasonable. That was the word okay. Moving on. Okay, any other questions on overseers and deacons? Should we move on? Let's move on. Now from there I went into what I call the third section, and that's Paul gives another reason for why he's writing. So he gives these lists, these character profiles, and then following the character profiles, in verse 14 he says, I write these things to you hoping to come to you soon. But if I should be delayed, I've written so that you will know how people ought to conduct themselves in God's household, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and foundation of the truth. And most certainly the mystery of godliness is great. He was manifested in the flesh, vindicated in the spirit, seen by angels, preached among the nations, believed on in the world, and taken up in glory. This final part, again, Paul is just giving these lists, this character profile, and then he draws us back to what matters again. This is the character of our leaders. And I send this to you so that you will know how people ought to conduct themselves. The character of those in the church should be this. And our central focus is found in the words of this hymn that declares, it absolutely declares the doctrine and the gospel message. Right? That Jesus appeared in the body, appeared in the flesh, was vindicated by the Spirit. And you see there, lines 1 and 2 are kind of a coupling. There's body and spirit, right? Flesh and spirit. In line 1 and 2. There's a fulfillment there, right? Dealing with one of those false teachings, this idea that if Jesus is God and God is spirit, then Jesus is just spirit and he was never flesh. That was one of the false teachings of the early church they had to deal with. We see it mostly in 2 John. But we still see it here as well, that this hymn clearly declared Jesus is flesh and fully God as well. He was spirit. He was divine. He was seen by angels and preached among the nations. His name was known. He was believed on in the world and taken up into glory. People believed in him, and he ascended to the highest place. Being an overseer or a deacon or a Christian in general, we are to live and conduct ourselves as people of good character. Good character, Timothy defines as godliness. That is good character. It might be defined by this list. Gives us a little bit of an overview of the character, good character profile. But ultimately, one who is godly, one who is of good character, is one who understands and is able to recognize and even say the words of this hymn. That he appeared in the flesh, was vindicated in the spirit, was seen by angels and was preached among the nations, was believed on in the world, and ascended into glory. That's ultimately the true standard and character of the church. It's the very heart of the church. It's the person of Jesus. And I love that Paul draws us back there constantly throughout his teaching here. This, in the very center of 1 Timothy, is a clear statement of true doctrine that the church needs to know.